What happens when America's most beloved late-night host decides to ambush a duchess on live television? Tonight we're diving into the explosive confrontation that left audiences speechless and one guest storming off stage. This is the untold story of how Jimmy Kimmel's calculated cruelty backfired spectacularly. Make sure to subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will shock you. The Tonight Show studios buzzed with anticipation as Meghan Markle prepared for what she believed would be a routine promotional interview. Her publicist had assured her this would be a friendly chat about her latest charitable initiatives and upcoming projects. The Duchess sat in the green leather chair, adjusting her elegant navy blazer, completely unaware that Jimmy Kimmel had spent the previous week crafting what he privately called his masterpiece of television journalism. Behind the cameras, Kimmel's producers exchanged knowing glances. Their boss had made it clear during the pre-show meeting that tonight would be different. "I'm tired of these celebrities thinking they can control the narrative," he had told his writing team earlier that day. "Tonight, we get real answers." The audience filing into their seats had no idea they were about to witness television history in the making, though not the kind anyone would want to remember. Kimmel emerged from his dressing room with an unusual energy, his typical jovial demeanor replaced by something sharper, more predatory. His longtime makeup artist noticed the change immediately. "You seem different tonight, Jimmy," she mentioned while applying his final touch-ups. "Just excited to do some real journalism for once," he replied, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The crew members who had worked with him for years exchanged concerned looks, sensing something was brewing beneath his polished exterior. As the show's iconic theme music began to play, Kimmel strode onto the stage with his characteristic wave and grin, but those who knew him well could detect the underlying tension. The audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that their beloved host was about to reveal a side of himself they had never seen before. Meghan, watching from backstage on a monitor, smiled warmly, still believing she was walking into a supportive environment. The opening monologue proceeded normally, with Kimmel delivering his usual mix of political jokes and celebrity gossip. But keen observers in the audience later recalled that his humor seemed more biting than usual, his commentary more pointed. He was warming up, like a boxer preparing for the main event. When he announced his guest, his voice carried an undertone that made his longtime announcer pause mid-introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle," Kimmel announced as she walked onto the stage. The audience cheered enthusiastically, and Meghan waved graciously, her smile genuine and warm. She had always been comfortable in interview settings, her years of acting and public speaking serving her well. But as she settled into the guest chair and looked across at Kimmel, something in his expression made her unconsciously straighten her posture. The first few minutes proceeded as expected. Kimmel asked about her recent trip to New York, her work with various charities, and her thoughts on returning to entertainment projects. Meghan answered thoughtfully, her responses measured and articulate. The audience seemed engaged, and the energy felt positive. But those watching closely could see Kimmel's jaw tighten slightly with each diplomatic answer, his fingers drumming impatiently on his desk. "So, Meghan," Kimmel said, leaning forward with what appeared to be genuine interest, "you've certainly had quite the journey from cable television actress to duchess to, well, whatever it is you're doing now." The audience chuckled, interpreting it as playful banter, but Meghan's smile faltered slightly. There was something in his tone, a subtle dismissiveness that hadn't been there moments before. "I prefer to think of it as evolution, Jimmy," she replied smoothly, though her media training kicked in as she recognized the slight. "We all grow and change, and I've been fortunate to have platforms that allow me to advocate for causes I believe in." Her response was diplomatic, but Kimmel's expression suggested he found her answer unsatisfactory. "Evolution, that's one way to put it," Kimmel replied, his smile becoming more forced. "Though some might say it's more like calculated reinvention." Tell me, at what point did you decide that marrying into the royal family was your ticket to global relevance? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and the audience's laughter died abruptly as they realized this wasn't the usual lighthearted celebrity chat. Meghan's eyes widened slightly, but she maintained her composure. I think you're mischaracterizing my relationship with Jimmy. We fell in love, plain and simple. Everything else was, frankly, more complicated than either of us anticipated. Her voice remained steady, but those familiar with her interviews could detect the slight tremor that indicated she was fighting to maintain control. Kimmel leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying the shift in dynamics. Oh, come on, Meghan. You're telling me that a struggling actress just happened to fall in love with a prince, without any thought to the career opportunities that might present? The audience isn't naive. Some uncomfortable shifting could be heard from the seats as viewers began to realize they were witnessing something unprecedented. I was hardly struggling, Jimmy, Meghan replied, her diplomatic mask beginning to slip. I had a successful 7-year run on a hit television show, my own lifestyle brand, and was working on projects I was passionate about. I didn't need to marry anyone for career advancement. Her voice carried a slight edge now, and Kimmel's eyes lit up as he sensed he was getting under her skin. The commercial break couldn't come soon enough, but instead of providing relief, it only gave Kimmel time to reload. During the break, Meghan's publicist rushed onto the set, whispering urgently in her ear. We can leave if you want, she offered, but Meghan shook her head firmly. I'm not giving him the satisfaction, she whispered back, straightening her blazer and preparing for round 2. As the cameras rolled again, Kimmel's demeanor had shifted into what could only be described as interrogation mode. Welcome back, everyone. We're here with Meghan Markle, and we were just discussing her, shall we say, strategic approach to love and marriage. The audience remained uncomfortably quiet, sensing that their usual role as laugh track participants was no longer appropriate. You know what fascinates me most about your story, Meghan? Kimmel continued without waiting for her response. It's how quickly you managed to position yourself as a victim of an institution that literally made you a duchess. Most people would consider that the ultimate success story, but somehow you've spun it into a tale of oppression. That's quite the narrative achievement. Meghan's hands clenched slightly in her lap, but her voice remained controlled when she responded. Jimmy, I think you're oversimplifying a very complex situation. No title or privilege is worth sacrificing your mental health or your family's safety. That's not playing victim. That's making difficult choices to protect the people you love most. But Kimmel wasn't finished, and his next words would prove to be the spark that ignited the explosion everyone would be talking about for weeks to come. Here's what I find particularly interesting, Kimmel said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. You talk about protecting your family, but wasn't it your own family that you threw under the bus first? Your father, your sister, even your own country seemed expendable when they didn't serve your narrative. So forgive me if I find your concern for family protection a little, shall we say, selective. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze as they realized they were capturing something that would either make or destroy careers. Meghan's composure finally cracked, her carefully maintained diplomatic expression giving way to something much more authentic and infinitely more dangerous. Excuse me? Meghan's voice was low, controlled, but anyone who had ever been in a real argument could recognize the warning signs. Did you just accuse me of throwing my family under the bus on national television without knowing anything about the private conversations, the years of attempted reconciliation, or the circumstances that led to those decisions? Kimmel sensed he had struck gold and leaned in further. I'm just asking the questions that everyone else is thinking, Meghan. You've made a career out of playing the victim, but at some point, don't you have to take responsibility for the chaos that seems to follow you wherever you go? California, Canada, England, now back to Hollywood. The common denominator in all these failed relationships and burned bridges is you. The audience began to murmur uncomfortably. Several people could be seen shaking their heads, and at least one person got up to leave. This was no longer entertainment, it was a public execution disguised as an interview. Meghan's publicist stood up in the wings, gesturing frantically to the producers, but Kimmel's team had clearly been instructed to let this play out. "Failed relationships?" Meghan repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Jimmy, I'm sitting here, as a happily married mother of two, talking about my charitable work and upcoming projects, and you've decided to turn this into some kind of character assassination. What exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" "I'm trying to get to the truth," Kimmel replied with mock sincerity. "The truth about someone who has made millions of dollars selling a story of victimhood while living in a $30 million mansion. The truth about someone who claims to want privacy while doing interview after interview, podcast after podcast, documentary after documentary. The truth about whether America is being sold a bill of goods by someone who couldn't make it work anywhere else." Meghan stood up abruptly, and for a moment it seemed like she might actually walk off the set. The camera zoomed in on her face, capturing the mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief that had replaced her earlier diplomatic composure. But instead of leaving, she turned back to face Kimmel directly, and when she spoke, her voice carried a steel that no one in that studio had expected. "You want the truth, Jimmy? Here's some truth for you. You've spent the last 10 minutes trying to humiliate me on your show because you think it makes for good television. You've made assumptions about my marriage, my family, my motivations, and my character, without knowing me personally or having any real insight into my life. And you've done it all while hiding behind the pretense of journalism and the protection of your little desk." The energy in the room shifted palpably. Kimmel's smug expression began to waver, as he realized that his intended victim was not going to crumble under pressure. Instead, she was fighting back, and she was doing it more effectively than he had anticipated. "But here's what I find most interesting about this whole performance," Meghan continued, her voice gaining strength. "You've made a career out of being America's lovable goofball, the guy who seems harmless and relatable. But what you've shown everyone tonight is that underneath all that manufactured charm is someone who gets his kicks from trying to tear down women who threaten him somehow. And the question everyone should be asking is, why does my existence threaten you so much?" Kimmel tried to regain control of the situation. "Now hold on, Meghan. I think you're being a little dramatic here. I'm just doing my job, asking the tough questions. If you can't handle a little scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't put yourself in the public eye." "A little scrutiny?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jimmy, you've accused me of being a gold digger, a family destroyer, a professional victim, and a fraud, all in the span of 15 minutes. And you've done it with the smuggest expression I've ever seen on television. That's not scrutiny. That's a hit job, and we both know it." The audience was now completely engaged, but not in the way Kimmel had intended. Instead of laughing along with his attacks, they were watching a real-time lesson in how power can corrupt even the most seemingly benign entertainers. Several audience members were recording on their phones, despite the show's strict no recording policy. "You know what the real problem is here, Jimmy?" Meghan said, walking closer to his desk. "You've spent so many years hiding behind scripted jokes and softball questions that you've forgotten how to have a real conversation with another human being. You think ambushing your guests makes you some kind of hard-hitting journalist, but all it really shows is that you're a bully with a platform." Kimmel's face was beginning to flush, and his usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned him entirely. "I resent the implication that I'm a bully, Meghan. I've been doing this show for 20 years, and I've never had a guest react like this before." "Maybe that's because you've never been this disrespectful to a guest before," Meghan shot back. "Or maybe it's because other people were too polite or too intimidated to call you out on your behavior. But I'm not other people, Jimmy. I've dealt with actual bullies in my life, people with real power who tried to use it to destroy me, and I survived that. So if you think I'm going to let a late-night talk show host make me feel small, You've seriously miscalculated. The production staff was in full panic mode now. The show's director was making frantic hand signals, trying to figure out whether to go to commercial or let this continue. Kimmel's producers were huddled in the corner, some looking terrified and others seemingly fascinated by the train wreck they were witnessing. "Look, Meghan," Kimmel said, trying to adopt a more conciliatory tone, "maybe we got off on the wrong foot here. Why don't we reset and talk about something more positive?" But Meghan was not about to let him off the hook that easily. "Oh no, Jimmy, you don't get to do that. You don't get to spend 20 minutes trying to destroy someone's character and then suddenly want to reset when you realize it's backfiring. You wanted the real Meghan Markle? Well, congratulations, you're getting her. And she's not going to smile politely while you try to rehabilitate your image at her expense." The tension in the studio was now so thick, it was almost visible. Kimmel looked genuinely rattled for the first time in his career, his usual confidence replaced by something approaching panic, as he realized he had completely lost control of his own show. "What I want to know," Meghan continued, "is what your end game was here. Did you think I would just sit there and take it? Did you think the audience would applaud while you tried to humiliate me? Or did you think this would somehow prove some point about celebrity culture or privilege or whatever justification you've created in your head for this behavior?" Kimmel opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, Meghan held up her hand to stop him. And what she said next would become the moment that everyone would remember long after the cameras stopped rolling. "You know what the most pathetic part of this whole thing is, Jimmy?" Meghan said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "You actually think you're the hero in this story. You think you're some kind of truth-telling warrior, exposing the fake celebrity for your loyal audience. But what you've really done is show everyone exactly who you are when you think nobody's watching closely enough to call you out." Kimmel's hands were visibly shaking now as he gripped his coffee mug, his trademark smirk completely gone. "Meghan, I think you're taking this way too personally. This is just television. It's just entertainment." "Just entertainment?" Meghan's eyes blazed with an intensity that made several audience members lean forward in their seats. "Jimmy, you've just spent the better part of a half hour trying to convince your audience that I'm a manipulative, gold-digging, family-destroying fraud. You've questioned my marriage, my motives, my character, and my integrity. And now you want to dismiss it as just entertainment?" The studio lights seemed to flicker in the tension-filled silence that followed. Even the usually invisible crew members had stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented destruction of a late-night television format that had remained unchanged for decades. "Here's what I find most telling about this whole experience," Meghan continued, beginning to pace slightly in front of Kimmel's desk like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "You've revealed that you fundamentally don't understand the difference between accountability and cruelty. You think that because you're asking hard questions, you're being journalistic. But real journalism requires integrity, fairness, and at least a basic level of respect for your subject. What you've done tonight is closer to a public flogging than an interview." Kimmel tried once more to regain his footing. "Now wait a minute, Meghan. I've interviewed thousands of guests over the years. Presidents, celebrities, activists, everyone. And I've never pulled my punches when I thought the questions needed to be asked." "Really?" Meghan stopped pacing and stared directly at him. "When was the last time you spent 20 minutes trying to psychoanalyze a male guest's motivations for marriage? When was the last time you accused a man of being a professional victim for speaking about his experiences? When was the last time you suggested that a male celebrity's relationship with his family was somehow calculated for personal gain?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Kimmel's inability to answer it immediately told everyone in the studio everything they needed to know. The audience was now completely silent, but it wasn't the respectful silence of people watching good television. It was the uncomfortable silence of people witnessing something that shouldn't be happening. "You see, Jimmy, that's the real issue." "Here," Meghan said, her voice becoming more measured but somehow more devastating. You've spent your entire career being the nice guy, the harmless comedian who makes people laugh before they go to bed. But put a woman in front of you who doesn't fit into your comfortable little categories, and suddenly you become something else entirely. Something much uglier. Kimmel's producer finally couldn't take it anymore, and stepped onto the set, whispering urgently in his ear. But Kimmel waved him away, his pride apparently preventing him from ending this disaster before it got even worse. "I think you're being completely unfair, Meghan," Kimmel said, his voice now noticeably higher than usual. "I treat all my guests the same way. I ask tough questions because that's what good interviewers do." "Do you, though?" Meghan asked, tilting her head slightly. "Because I did my homework before coming here tonight, Jimmy. I watched your recent interviews with other celebrities who've had public controversies. I watched how you handled male actors who've had legal troubles, how you approached politicians who've been accused of far worse things than anything I've ever been accused of. And you know what I noticed?" She paused for effect, and the silence stretched out until it became almost unbearable. "You gave them the benefit of the doubt. You let them explain their side of the story. You showed them basic human decency even when discussing their mistakes. But somehow, when it comes to me, a woman who left a situation that was harmful to her family, you've decided that I deserve to be publicly humiliated on your show." Kimmel looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk. His usual quick wit had completely abandoned him, and he seemed to be struggling to form coherent thoughts, let alone responses. "And you know what the most ironic part of this whole thing is?" Meghan continued, her voice now carrying a note of something that might have been pity. "You've spent so much energy trying to expose me as some kind of fraud that you've completely exposed yourself instead. Your audience has now seen what you're really like when you think you can get away with it. They've seen the real Jimmy Kimmel, and it's not pretty." The camera operators were now zooming in on audience members' faces, capturing expressions of shock, disappointment, and genuine discomfort. This was not the lovable late-night host they had come to see. This was someone else entirely, someone they didn't recognize and didn't particularly like. "You want to know what I think really happened here tonight, Jimmy?" Meghan asked, her voice becoming almost conversational. "I think you've been listening to too much of your own press. I think you've started to believe that because people laugh at your jokes, they'll also applaud when you try to destroy someone. I think you confused being popular with being right, and being funny with being smart." Kimmel finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Meghan, I never intended for this to go this far. Maybe we should just end this segment and move on." "Oh no, Jimmy," Meghan said, shaking her head with a sad smile. "You don't get to decide when this ends. You started this fight, and now you're going to see how it finishes. Because here's the thing about bullies, they're always tough until someone stands up to them. And then they become exactly what you've become right now, small and pathetic, and looking for an exit." She walked back to her chair, but instead of sitting down, she picked up her purse and looked directly into the camera that had been focusing on her throughout the confrontation. "To everyone watching at home, I want you to remember this moment. Remember what it looks like when someone with power decides to abuse it. Remember what it sounds like when someone tries to disguise cruelty as entertainment. And remember that you have the power to decide whether this kind of behavior is acceptable in your name." She turned back to Kimmel one final time, and when she spoke, her voice carried a finality that made it clear this conversation was over. "Jimmy, I came here tonight to talk about my work, my projects, and my hopes for the future. Instead, you've given me something much more valuable. You've given me the opportunity to show people how to stand up to bullies, even when they have their own television show. So thank you for that. I hope it was worth it." And with that, Meghan Markle walked off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and a moment that would be replayed, analyzed, and remembered for years to come. The cameras continued rolling as Kimmel sat in shocked silence, completely unable to recover from the systematic destruction of his reputation that had just played out in front of millions of viewers. What did you think of this explosive confrontation? Do you believe Meghan was right to fight back, or should she have handled it differently? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one.